My name's Phil Mitchell. I'm a counsellor, psychotherapist and supervisor, and I specialise in working with boys and men who've experienced different types of sexual abuse, either as children, adults or both. I do a lot of training, which are now webinars for obvious reasons, addressing different aspects of the sexual abuse and exploitation of boys and men. I've been asked to do this short video for International Men's Day, so here I am, and I've been asked to talk about boys and men and the disadvantages and the suffering they face. I guess I've been asked to do this in a very short amount of time, so I'm going to be as brief and succinct as I can. I guess one thing that stands out for me, so when I first started working in the field of child sexual exploitation, I very quickly realised that boys were getting quite a raw deal. I'm certainly not saying girls and women had it easy. They didn't. There were certain issues that definitely needed addressing there. However, what I found, as I've said in other videos I've done, was the issue around identification. Girls were displaying certain behaviours such as going missing, hanging around with older men, turning up with gifts and items that they were being secretive around how they got them, and lots of professionals, social workers, teachers, etc. were going child sexual exploitation, refer, signpost, risk assessment, etc. etc. What I saw was a number of boys who were displaying similar, or in some cases exactly the same behaviours as the girls, and child sexual exploitation was not being thought of. It was quickly being dismissed, sometimes in very inappropriate ways, in my opinion, and it was really concerning. Fast forward sort of 10, 12 years later, a lot of child sexual exploitation teams are now child exploitation teams, and they deal with sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation. I know from my work and from the people that I supervise, my colleagues that I speak to, the training webinars I've delivered, often what happens is exploitation teams have, in blunt terms, two lists. A list of children at risk of criminal exploitation or being criminally exploited, and a risk of children who are being sexually exploited or who are at risk of being sexually exploited. The sexual exploitation list has huge amounts of girls. The criminal exploitation list has huge amounts of boys. And when I see news articles appearing, as they have over the sort of year or so, about criminal exploitation, county lines, children being used to move drugs from A to B and so on, some of these articles often highlight the warning signs that we should be looking out for that can alert us to criminal exploitation. But when you look at these warning signs, they're often identical to the warning signs that we should be looking out for child sexual exploitation. Sadly, what we often get is a lot of professionals saying a girl displays these behaviours, let's consider child sexual exploitation. A boy displays these behaviours, let's consider criminal exploitation. Now, a lot of people say, yes, but Phil, we know he's being used for criminal exploitation. He's told us, we've seen it, it's all there. Yeah, arguably, it's easier to prove youth offended in criminal exploitation than sexual exploitation. One relies much more heavily on a disclosure, perhaps it could be said. Now, this is one of the problems that we have, the gender biased practice. Now, to be fair, there are some professionals that are amazing, they're excellent, they get it, they understand. They don't display gender biased practice. Some sadly do. Which is why I do a lot of the training and the webinars I do. But I've certainly worked with a number of boys and a number of men, all of whom have said, when I was being abused, my social worker, my parents, or people, adults in my life at the time, thought I was stealing. They thought I was a bad boy. I was misbehaving. It was youth offending, etc. And some have gone, and that was fine by me, because I'd rather everybody think I'm out there stealing things and nicking things and coming across as a big macho gangster, etc., than knowing what's really going on. It's not about saying, yes, it's definitely child sexual exploitation, or yes, it's definitely child criminal exploitation. It's about being open to the possibility that when a child displays certain behaviours, it could be criminal exploitation, it could be sexual exploitation. But just because a boy displays those behaviours, we shouldn't automatically think it's not child sexual exploitation, it's criminal exploitation. And that's the thoughts we have to challenge. I think another thing, and certainly on the more wider scale, is the message that society is giving boys and men. So, again, people that I supervise, colleagues of mine, peers, one of the things that a number of us are noticing is that society, or a certain part of society, is giving boys and men the message that you are bad because you are a male. Simple as that. A very black and white view. I think it was earlier this year, I can't remember an exact day, but the hashtag kill all men was trending on Twitter. And I was very vocal about this. And what I was hearing was, yeah, but it's a laugh, it's a joke, it's okay. Now, everyone's got different senses of humour and so on. And, I guess it's useful to consider that. I think when you put something like that online publicly for everyone to read, it's reasonable to think that some people will not see it as a joke. There's the whole, well, men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed. And I don't think it's as black and white as that. I think it's more reasonable to say that there are disadvantages and suffering that uniquely / disproportionately affects girls and women. There are disadvantages and suffering that uniquely / disproportionately affects boys and men. I think we've got to be less black and white about it and appreciate the context and the nuances. But I think this, I've certainly worked with boys this year, and colleagues of mine have, where they've said things such as, am I bad because I'm a boy? And when we explore this, that they've been given messages directly and indirectly that's saying, oh, well, being a male is bad, being a boy is bad, and so on and so on. There were people on Twitter saying that I'm pregnant, I'm going to have a scan soon to find out if it's a girl or an abortion. There were people saying, quite literally, you can probably find it now, when I say kill all men, I mean it. This sort of misandry is out there. I'm certainly not saying misogyny is not an issue, but what I am saying, arguably a lot more focus and attention and support is behind let's stop misogyny than misandry. And I don't think it should be one or the other. That's what we have to think about. I've lost count of the amount of boys and men I've worked with who have experienced various forms of misandry in so many different ways. Absolutely lost. There was, only this week I had a conversation with someone who has given me permission to share it, and I have shared it online. And this person had said that he knew of girls in certain educational settings saying to boys, you're an automatic failure because you're a male, because you're a boy. Why don't you just kill yourself? Why don't you just throw yourself off a bridge? And so on and so on. And I think, as horrific as that is, I think what makes it for me even more horrific is that the biggest killer of males is suicide. And it's, I think, I worked with one male who said that he was told, go and kill yourself and increase the suicide stats. I could go on forever, but I think what we have to do is stop seeing boys and men as bad. And there are just so many parts of society that do. We come from this automatic place where boys and men are bad. Masculinity is bad. Masculinity has been labelled as toxic. Now, there's different ways of looking at that. There are some people that say, yes, masculinity is toxic. That's why we say toxic masculinity. Others say, no, we're not saying masculinity is toxic. We're saying it can be displayed in toxic ways. Sadly, I think that a lot of people will automatically assume, oh, well, this phrase toxic masculinity is going around. That must mean masculinity is toxic. Not at all. The amazing book, the Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology and Mental Health, which came out earlier last year, I believe, phenomenal. It completely changed my practice and it just made so much sense. And it kind of highlighted that traditional aspects of masculinity are good and are positive. And to be honest, I'd never really thought of this. And after I'd read the book, and it's a very thick book, bear in mind, I felt quite embarrassed that I'd never, ever considered it, because the way it was explained in the book just seemed so obvious. So one of the things that I often share on Twitter is the phrase tonic masculinity. I did not come up with that hashtag. I can't claim the credit for that. It was a professional based somewhere in the States. I think it's Janice Flamingo. I might be pronouncing her second name wrong, so I can't claim credit for that. But it's just an amazing hashtag, because we should talk so much about toxic masculinity. Let's talk about tonic masculinity, where masculinity is seen in a good way. For example, the vast majority of people who, certainly in the UK, who do the dangerous jobs, men. The vast majority of people who risk their lives in jobs to save others for the benefit of others, men. Arguably, the vast majority of people who will risk their life to save people that they see out and about, men. Just go to Google, as I generally do most days, and type in boy saves or man saves, ... Man risks life saving, ... Boy risks life saving, ... And see what comes up, see what you find. Huge amounts of men doing that. Now, from a biological point of view, the Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology, again, phenomenal book, says that, well, boys and men have got more testosterone in them, and that has an impact on their brain and their behaviour and what they do. It also says that boys and men are kind of, they come from a natural place where they want to provide, protect, fight for others, and so on. And I think often, and it's Martin Seeger in the book who talks about the male archetype, who says that actually these traits of fighting and providing and protecting, etc., these are not bad. I guess they can be displayed in a very bad, harmful way. Fighting, yeah, of course, someone who displays fighting can do it in a very harmful way. However, it can also be definitely argued that when that trait is displayed, it can be done for positive outcomes, for the benefit of other people. Sometimes we have to fight to survive and live. If we didn't fight, then I'm not sure what the human race would look like now. There's also the other way of kind of saying, let's fight on a sort of mental level, a cognitive level, an emotional level. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that all of the traditional aspects of masculinity are not bad. Yeah, they are not bad. They should not be labelled as bad. What can be harmful is what people believe about these traits. For example, if a boy or a man in therapy with me said, this has happened and I need to fight, I should always fight. The bit that I would pick out from that was the word always. And one of the things that I often work with clients, boys and men, is the rigidity around their beliefs. I must never cry. Never? Ever? What? Never? I must always fight. Always? And I think we have to have the context, and therapy can help boys and men kind of focus on that. There are times where it's okay to cry. There are times where it's perhaps not okay to cry. Context. There are times where it's appropriate to fight. There are times where it's perhaps not appropriate to fight. Again, so many different contexts to consider. But it's about, I think, giving boys and men a very clear message that you are male and that does not make you bad. Yeah. Your masculinity does not make you bad. Yeah. I would actually argue that many boys and men display traditional elements of masculinity in a very positive and in a very helpful way. Yeah. And so we have to stop this sort of narrow-minded thinking and be a little bit more open to different ways of looking at things. Yep, that's what we have to do. I think the other thing as well is what we're measuring things against. A lot of people say, yes, but look at all of the people that perpetrate violence against a partner. It's men. Well, it depends on what you're sourcing. If you go to the Office of National Statistics, most of the people who perpetrate violence against their partner, according to those statistics, are men. But that's from what's reported, that's from what's recorded. That also links to someone disclosing or speaking to police. But if you look at research, if you look at all the data from various studies out there, the vast majority of violence in relationships is bidirectional. Yeah, there's so many different studies out there, and I think sometimes I suspect what might be happening is there are certain people and groups of people that are focusing on this data because it feeds their narrative rather than everything available. Yes, from the Office of National Statistics, what that highlights is that the vast majority of people who perpetrate violence against their partner are men. But that's part of the picture. The bigger picture is what we should look at. What about all the other people that don't engage with the police and other services that feed into the Office of National Statistics? I can never say that word. What about other sources? What about the vast amount of research out there that highlights that most, a significant amount of violence in relationships, in intimate partner relationships, is bidirectional? So again, we have to think of that. But what we know, yeah, is if boys and men were really bad, as some people say they are, because they're men, then we wouldn't have the vast amount of men doing everything they can now for the benefit of other people. Yeah. For example, when and there's a few social experiment videos online, you can Google them and find them, but there's a few, but one in particular that stands out was when there was a social experiment where there's a man and a woman, and the woman shouted at the man and pushed him, yeah, and then it was reversed where the man shouted at the woman and pushed her, yeah. When the woman was shouting at the man and pushing him, people were laughing, people were joking, people were recording it on their phone. I don't think anyone, if my memory serves me right, stepped in and said, this is not okay. But guess what happened when it was the other way around? When you had the man pushing the woman and having a go at her, yeah, what happened was people, men and women, I think mainly men if I remember, walked over with, this is not okay, that's not all right, you stop doing that, that's not okay. Yeah? But if men were so bad, they'd be going over and joining in. Yeah? No men at all ran and joined in. Why did they not do that? Because men, in fact, people, I would argue, although some would disagree, are inherently good. Yeah. Now that might be a little bit black and white. Some people might disagree with that. We all have different ideas about what good is. So we can, maybe it's a bit of that's a controversial issue perhaps in itself. But as I've said, men did not run over and go, ha ha, this man is pushing this woman about, let's help him. No one did that. Men went over and said, stop doing that. Yeah. It talks about all the men that commit violent acts and who are in prison for killing people and so on. Yeah, of course, there are prisons all over the world full of men who have committed violent acts. But that's a significant minority of the male population of the planet. Yeah? There are men out there that want to provide for their families, look after their families, protect their loved ones, willing to risk their own lives and their own safety for other people. There are men and boys out there that are willing to kind of fight for their loved ones and so on and so on. Yeah. So I think we have to stop seeing men as bad, boys and men as just bad. The other thing is I guess it's perhaps another controversial issue, is the double standard that's out there. So, and a lot of this is perhaps sometimes based on opinion. But as I mentioned in our earlier conversation, we have a violence against women and girls strategy. We do not have a violence against men and boys strategy, despite the fact that the vast majority of people who die from violence, according to data, are men. I'm certainly not saying we should not have a violence against women and girls strategy. I think we should have one, and it's good that we have one, and I support it. I don't support the absence of a violence against men and boys strategy. However, the fabulous Men and Boys Coalition at the minute are taking steps to try and do something about that, which is great. But again, that perhaps highlights that we're looking after girls and women and doing what we can to protect them. We're not necessarily doing the same with boys and men. There was a video, I think it was on TikTok earlier this year, and I can't remember exactly what it was called, but I think it was called the bag challenge or the handbag challenge. And what would happen, you'd have a man and a woman in the front of a car. The video would be recording. I don't think the man knew it was recording. And what the woman would do, she would pick up her handbag or reach the back seat, and as she grabbed it, she would sort of pull it to the front of the car so she would go in, look into it. But as she pulled it, it whacked against the man's face. And he would go, whoa, what are you doing? Yeah. But then she'd put it back and whack him in the face again. And most of the women laughed and giggled and thought it was hilarious. Swap the genders. Swap the genders, but keep the behaviour exactly the same. In my opinion, and the opinion of many, I think, that would have been deemed extremely unacceptable. Now, there were people, men and women, who were saying that's completely unacceptable, it's not okay, stop it. There were. In my view, I think there would have been a lot more, significantly more people demonising the actions of a man being violent towards a woman and joking about it. But when it's a woman doing it to a man, it's laughed. It's laughed upon. It's joked about. Just look at the amount of soap operas, TV shows, and dramas. Yeah, when a woman slaps a man, it's done in a way that suggests he deserved it. But you never see men slapping women in the same way. I'm not saying we should see that. What I'm saying is it highlights gender inequality. It highlights a double standard. Yeah, and that's what we have to kind of highlight and challenge and say, look, this is the response that kind of girls and women are getting. You know, what response are boys and men getting? Yeah, that's what we have to think. Since March this year, when everything was happening around COVID and so on, I, as many practitioners, I've saw a little bit of a lull in working with clients. We've all had to get used to Zoom and working online, of course. But one of the things that I have seen a lot of from some of the boys and men that I have worked with and heard from other people that I work with about boys and men, a real issue around failure, about men in particular thinking they are a failure, or that they are not as successful as they think they should be. And I think sometimes how men are dealing with the lockdown, they often take a step back and go, I'm a failure because I'm not dealing with it. I'm not coping with it. But one of the things that I often ask is, okay, so tell me what you are doing that you think shows that you're not dealing with it, you're not coping with it. And a lot of the answers are things going, well, you know what, I just get really angry and I have to go into my back garden and like kick the wall. Sometimes, and you know, if it's really too much, I'm in my bedroom and I burst into tears. You know, I remember one day I felt so overwhelmed. I had to take a few days off work, and it was just really overwhelming. And I said, so maybe everything you've just described there, perhaps they're not examples of you not dealing with it. Perhaps that's how you deal with it. And a lot of men say, I never thought of it like that. And you can see it really has an impact on them. And it's helping them see things from perhaps a different perspective, being open to looking at things in a different way. Following on from that, it's sometimes useful to work with the boys and men and say, so what is your idea of success? What is your idea of failure? And sometimes what I hear are very rigid beliefs that include the words like always or never. And I think it's about working with boys and men around more flexible beliefs, realistic beliefs. Sometimes, although not always, sometimes exploring their perception about being male and masculinity can be useful. What's been really interesting is when I've worked with a number of boys and men and sort of explored their views around masculinity, I think every single one of them, where there's been an in-depth discussion about it based on what they've said, every single one of them has been surprised to find themselves in a place where they're going, oh, yeah, I guess masculinity can be good. It can be useful. It can be helpful. I never really thought of that. And isn't that brilliant that they get to the point that they think that? But isn't it also a shame that these men have never considered that masculinity can be positive and good? Why is that? Is it because we have a media that is going, men are bad and masculinity is bad? Is it because we have certain groups of people saying men are all bad, kill on all of this, masculinity is bad, and so on and so on? Perhaps. There are a number of people I've worked with where they have said, I just get told I'm bad because I'm a guy, masculinity is bad, and so on. And I think when you explore in a slightly more balanced way and focus on someone's beliefs around it and what they think, I think they can get to a place that's healthier. They have a healthy, realistic, balanced view, perhaps, of masculinity, rather than it's bad, it's as simple as that. Yeah. I think one of the things is that, I've certainly adapted the way I work in the last sort of perhaps 3 years, because one of the things I was finding, and colleagues as well, men will come into therapy and we were saying all the traditional stereotypical things, talk about your feelings, it's okay to express your feelings, it's okay, just talk. And a lot of men were kind of saying, that puts me off. And again, in various texts and literature, it's highlighted. But one of the things that I found, again, from reading the amazing Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology, which I keep talking about, was, well, change your approach a little bit. So rather than saying to men, come and talk to a therapist about your feelings, it's okay, people, including myself, were saying, if you come to therapy, that's you taking steps to control your situation and taking control. And a lot of men, oh yeah, I like that. I like that. You know, you're taking action to do something about your situation. Yeah. Sometimes, yes, it did involve talking about feelings, and that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But one of the things that I think is fair to say is a lot of therapists and other helping professionals will try to get boys and men to talk about their feelings. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm certainly not saying that it. I guess what I am saying is it's not always the best response. And there are other responses, sort of male-friendly language, male-friendly approaches, action-orientated ways of working, solution-focused stuff. And so within that, boys and men might talk about their feelings, they might not. But I think for me, therapy isn't about getting any client necessarily to talk about their feelings. It can be a part of it, but it's not an automatic must. For me, it's about making sure that whoever I'm working with leaves therapy saying they got something useful out of it. And the methods we use will vary from person to person and perhaps sex to sex. But there is a growing amount of literature now around what are classed as, in general, male-friendly approaches, how to approach things, being a male-friendly therapist, and so on and so on. And I think as a therapist, as practitioners, I think what we have to do is take a step back and go, what are our views on boys and men? What are our views on masculinity? What's all that about? Are we open to different ways of looking at things? I think if you come from the point of view that masculinity is bad, and that's my starting point, and that's my starting point for when I work with boys and men in therapy, that's not a view that I would support at all. And I know that some people do and have come from that point of view, which I think is very problematic. What we kind of have to do is respect traditional elements of masculinity, and if we're not open to it, be open to the fact that they can be displayed in a very positive, helpful way. Absolutely. I think that the disappointing thing sometimes is a lot of people are saying, well, men are to blame for men's problems. Apart from the fact that that's a huge amount of victim blaming, which we are not supposed to be doing in this society, although some seem to encourage it's okay to victim blame men but not women. How about not victim blaming any victim? You know, people have said to me, yeah, but the reason that the biggest killer of men is suicide is because of men themselves and toxic masculinity. Men need to talk more and open up more and express their feelings more. Well, maybe, but actually, what about people respecting men more for being men? What about respecting masculine norms and accepting that they can be manifested in very positive, healthy ways? What about using a healthy view of masculinity to help men overcome their problems, rather than saying you need to just talk about your feelings? Yeah. I've worked with men where, you know, they've kind of said things to me in therapy, and my response has sometimes been, it sounds to me like you're doing your best to take control of your situation. Oh, I never thought of it like that. I went, well, you've said this, you've done that, you're doing that. It sounds to me like that's you taking control. Again, they like it, they hear it, it helps them engage. I'm not convinced that saying, it sounds to me like things are really difficult for you now. I'm not convinced that response alone will work with all men, or with all women, to be fair. Yeah, it's about knowing the sort of differences. That's what we have to do. But I think one of the things I often see and hear are people sometimes saying, well, we need to get men to challenge abusive men. And I think that's a fair point. I think maybe, you know, we do need more men challenging abusive men. In my view, there are some doing that. Enough? I don't know. Some would say yes, some would say no. But in my view, and arguably, there are nowhere near enough people, men and women, highlighting that actually here are the disadvantages that uniquely and disproportionately affect boys and men. Here are the amazing things that boys and men do that overwhelmingly contribute to society. Yeah, I'm certainly not saying we should focus on one issue more than the other. All issues need addressing, of course, but I think it's more than reasonable to say that a lot of focus and energy goes into highlighting how men display bad behaviour and not how they display good behaviour, and also not how, in some cases, women abuse boys and men as well. And I think that's something we sometimes have to think about, because there's just not, for me, necessarily a balance there. When men display bad behaviour, such as violence towards a partner, for example, people very quickly say that's toxic masculinity. I'm not going to say, yes, it is, no, it isn't, whatever, but that's what a lot of people say. They attribute the abusive behaviour to masculinity, yeah, or a form of masculinity, perhaps. But when men do amazing things, overwhelmingly good things, contributing to society, being the ones that risk their lives to do dangerous jobs, to look after others, to save, to protect, to risk their own lives to save other people. A lot of people say, well, that's nothing to do with masculinity. That's just a person being a good person. So I take a step back and I say, so what I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing is that when men do bad, it's because they are men. It's because of their masculinity. But when men do good, it's nothing to do with them being men. They don't deserve a pat on the back for being good. I think that shows a really problematic view, and it shows a bit of bias. And and that's something else that is useful perhaps to think about.